Good morning, everyone. We are here at the Special Committee on Poverty in Prince Edward Island. At the start of these meetings, I always like to just touch base with the mandate of this particular committee. So this committee is working on recommendations to establish clear definitions and measures of poverty and a living wage for Prince Edward Island, as well as within 12 months, fully costed recommendations regarding the creation of a basic income guarantee pilot for Prince Edward Island. So that is what we've been working toward, and we have two groups of presenters here today. I also just want to start by recognizing Roxanne Carter-Thompson from the Adventure Group, and I always forget to recognize her. I was saying to Roxanne that I make a note on my paper to do that, and then I take so many other notes that I've missed it. So I really appreciate Roxanne being here for this presentation. We'll start off by first acknowledging the members of the committee who are here. So I'm Trish Altas, chair of the committee. We have Gordon McNeely, Sunny Gallant, Hannah Bell, Ernie Hudson, and sitting in for Natalie Jameson is Sydney McEwen today. So we've circulated the agenda. Has everybody had a chance to look at that? All right, looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Ernie Hudson, thank you. All right, all in favor of the agenda? Yes, wonderful. So what we will do now is hand over the floor to our first presenters. We have Kelly McWilliams, board member for PEI Canadian Association of Social Workers, and Bruce Davidson, president of the PEI Association of Social Workers, here to present on our committee mandate today, and we're really looking forward to that presentation. What we'll do is I'll hand over the floor to you. You can share your presentation with us, and then we will open the floor to questions. All right, with that, I will just hand it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Kelly McWilliams, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to present to you this morning. I'm representing the Canadian Association of Social Workers and bring a social work perspective to your discussion on poverty and basic income guarantee. So the profession of social work is committed to social justice and believes in the dignity and inherent worth of all persons. And founded in 1926, CASW serves as the national voice for the social work profession in Canada, with a dual mandate of promoting the profession of social work, but also advancing issues of social justice. So social workers are acutely aware of the impact of poverty, and we see it every day in the lives of the clients that we serve. Poverty places significant strains on individuals, families, our communities, ourselves, our province, and our country. When we speak about ending poverty, it's important that we first shift our mindset from viewing it as charity to viewing it as an issue of fundamental human rights and justice. In looking at the issue of poverty and the importance of a basic income guarantee, I can't help but think of the work of humanistic psychologist Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. His hierarchy notes 5 levels of human need, with the first level of need needing to be met in order to be able to move on to the next level. So the first level of the hierarchy are physiological needs: food, water, shelter, rest. In today's economic system, if a person isn't able to meet those basic needs, they can't adequately move forward to meet those higher level needs. That is what people are getting caught up in. They can't move forward to the next level of needs, such as the safety and security of both their body and their life circumstances, the social needs and healthy relationships, esteem needs, such as a sense of accomplishment, confidence, and respect, and the highest level of need, self-actualization, where they can reach their full potential and fully contribute to society. Without a basic income guarantee that can provide people access to those fundamental rights such as food, water, shelter, it's exceedingly difficult to live with a sense of dignity and worth and set goals and achieve potential and contribute to society. We therefore lose the vibrancy and depth of talent and humanity that fills our diverse island communities. And while there may be different perspectives regarding who actually bears responsibility for ensuring that basic needs are met, let me be very clear. Poverty is not a lack of character, it's a lack of cash. Poverty is a violation of the most fundamental human rights. So our job as social workers, and your job as elected government members, is to protect those rights by ending poverty. We believe this can be done through a basic income guarantee. So how can implementing a basic income guarantee make a difference in the lives of islanders, especially children? So basic income pilot projects, such as in Dauphin, Manitoba, have proven that when people can secure their basic needs, they can pursue life-altering opportunities. In her analysis of the data from the Dauphin Project in Manitoba, Evelyn Forget, economist and professor at the University of Manitoba, found that participants in the project tended to further their education and find more meaningful employment, therefore improving their life circumstance. She also noted a reduced impact on the healthcare system. I believe that Dr. Hirokazu Yoshikawa, a developmental psychologist and professor at NYU, put the importance of a basic income guarantee best in a recent article in Maclean's magazine. He was recently interviewed regarding a research project he is involved in called Baby's First Years, which aims to provide conclusive evidence of the impact of poverty on children's development and the impact that resolving that poverty can make. Dr. Yoshikawa stated that part of the stress of poverty is the uncertainty of your ability as a household to deal with the unpredictable things that come up. Those things he's referring to would be such things as illness or health-related concerns or home maintenance. It is hard to have that proverbial nest egg for the unexpected when you're struggling just to meet your basic needs. He further states that you are more focused on survival and making ends meet, and that both increases your stress and decreases your ability to pay attention to the early aspects of early childhood development. This speaks to the danger of thinking that the best social safety net is secure employment. A single mother trying to hold down several jobs to provide for her children doesn't need another job if medical or other expenses arise. She needs a way for that financial burden to be reduced so she can spend quality time with her children. That is what children and families need. When parents are continually stressed and preoccupied with trying to make ends meet, it's hard for them to be a fully engaged parent, spouse, or employee. Family relationships and general functioning are compromised, at times leading to depression, anxiety, and in some cases, family violence. Social workers and others who work in the area of family violence can attest to the fact that many women even stay in abusive relationships due to financial dependence or interdependence. A basic income guarantee can help women leave abusive relationships, reduce risk and trauma, and break that cycle of violence. As a social worker in the field of child protection, I see families facing these issues every day. Tension regarding finances leads to arguing, which can escalate to family violence. A stressed parent who is so worried about their ability to provide, they can't be attuned to their child's emotional or physical needs, or they react to their child's behavior in negative or harmful ways, instead of having the means to address the root problem that they are facing, poverty. These are traumas that have lifelong impacts and are passed on from one generation to the next. We also know that poverty creates and perpetuates systemic barriers, making it often impossible to escape that cycle. I see families missing important appointments for themselves and their children due to lack of finances or transportation. By missing the appointments, they're not able to fully benefit from those services, which can leave them further marginalized and unable to move forward in life. A basic income guarantee has proven time and again that when we give families enough to cover their basic needs, it helps reduce these stresses, therefore improving family functioning, children's well-being. They have what they need to focus on Maslow's higher level needs and reach their potential and more fully contribute and engage in society. We all reap the benefits. Dr. Yoshikawa also indicates that a basic income guarantee can also provide families with the opportunity for more quality family experiences, as well as more educational and recreational opportunities for their children and a higher quality of childcare. Basically, an overall more enriching life for themselves and their children. While the benefits of a basic income guarantee to eliminate poverty are so clear, the costs of poverty are also very clear. In the report, The Cost of Poverty by the Ontario Association of Food Banks, it is noted that the health of people with lower incomes was worse than those with higher incomes due to the stress of trying to meet basic needs, a lack of appropriate health knowledge, and financial barriers to things like prescriptions or specialist care, such as dental or eye care, occupational therapy, physiotherapy. Correlations were also drawn between poverty, literacy and education levels, and crime rates. Intergenerational costs of poverty were also noted, and that children raised in impoverished conditions have a harder time moving forward from those conditions and are at risk of poverty in their adulthood. There are also costs in terms of lost tax revenue for government to then invest back into public services. There's a loss to the economy as a whole when people do not have the disposable income to spend. There's a loss of innovation when people do not have the financial means or esteem and support to contribute. Some people will say that governments like PEI can't afford to implement a basic income guarantee, but we're here to tell you, you can't afford not to. In a 2017 position paper regarding universal basic income, Canadian Association of Social Workers recommended that a model of universal basic income guarantee be implemented with a basic personal amount or exemption of $20,000 per person. As noted in the paper, taxation rates would need to be reevaluated to ensure that BIG met its intended purpose of equity, social cohesion, and an effective redistribution of wealth. This basic guarantee is recommended to only replace traditional welfare or social assistance programming and shouldn't be intended to replace or claw back any other social programming, such as EI, CPP, child tax benefit, accessibility programs. So in conclusion, I leave you with the following quote. Overcoming poverty is not a task of charity. It is an act of justice. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. You can be that generation. Let your greatness blossom. That was stated by none other than Nelson Mandela. So if you can't take my word for it, I think you can take his. I believe that you are in an incredible position to demonstrate that greatness and make a tremendous difference in the lives of island families and children for generations to come and serve as an example across Canada and the world. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Bruce.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to make our views known on this important issue. And I would add, too, that in any such setting, our association is confronted by the reality that many of our members, such as Kelly and I, are employed in the public sector. So wear different hats sometimes when we're dealing with government or dealing with the House, and we appreciate that tradition of recognizing which hat I'm currently wearing. So thank you for that. The Prince Edward Island Association of Social Workers represents island social workers on the work they conduct with islanders every day. Social workers work in a multitude of settings to help residents of this province bring about change. This change may be focused on individual or societal change and happens in the community, in services to children and their families, through the mental health and addiction system, in virtually every healthcare setting, in private practice, and in the nonprofit sector. Social workers bring a unique set of skills that include highly specialized tools for individual change, through to interventions on whichever systems are most negatively affecting islanders' health, safety, and well-being. Our business is helping clients realize their greater potential. A guaranteed annual income appears to offer the most credible option for true poverty reduction and greater economic equality. To realize it will require a great deal of courage and cooperative work. And even as we acknowledge the inequities and the oppression of the past, this province has progressed through similar acts of vision in the past. One only needs to think of the Comprehensive Development Plan of 1969 or the bold steps that were taken to establish accessible public education in PEI in the mid-1800s. In both of these cases, bold, transformative steps were taken by PEI to move to a better future. It is the hope of the PEI-ASW that the government will see guaranteed annual income as such a step, a bold step that moves PEI to a better future. None of us in any form of public service have time to look for a defining issue, have time to look for an issue that will define the era that we're practicing in. But I guess in the back of my head, I have some thought that this might be one of those opportunities. This might be an opportunity for an issue that will leave a legacy like that. And I think you're going to have access to a lot of really good research and a lot of really good information about that. So I don't feel like I need to go into it any further. But specifically, we have several recommendations as an association. And it's our recommendation that a program be truly universal. This is more than an idealistic plea for fairness. Universal programs are more effective and therefore offer the best value and return. The present inequities in PEI's employment insurance zones are evidence that any program that's not truly universal will not be fair or equitable. Number 2, that a universal income guarantee be viewed primarily as a poverty reduction measure, I would add without apology. This is in light of the many ways that we are just beginning to understand how income inequality affects physical and mental health, well-being, and even issues of fundamental safety. And I was glad to hear Kelly go into some detail on that. Number 3, evidence has shown consistently that income is actually connected to an individual's ability to access other supports, such as tax breaks and supports available in the community. That is, there seems to be a minimum level of income that one must have to access other supports in the community. One must have money to be fully supported by the rest of society. And for all we, I think sometimes don't want to think about community like that, it is true. So with those recommendations, thank you for this opportunity and to briefly share our thoughts on this vital issue. Social workers and PEI look forward to being part of the hard work to improve how Islanders care for each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kelly and Bruce, for that presentation. I'll now open the floor to questions.
I always go
Hannah.
first, Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation today. I'm really interested, perhaps Kelly, to start where you had, so I'm just going to get my notes here. You had talked about that $20,000 benchmark or something that
Yes.
had been in your original, I think in your research paper and mentioned
paper,
again.
yes.
So that was the, where did that number, could you speak to where that number came from?
Sure, the position paper was published just before I came onto the board, but it's my understanding they reached that number because it was above the low-income cutoff or the poverty line, but not quite at the low-income measure, where we started accounting for the number of people in the household, so that was the number they settled on because it was in between those.
Okay.
Annabelle?
Thank you, Chair. So in this committee, we've also been looking at the measurement of poverty, and we know that in just more recently, there's been a national measure that's been sort of set as a benchmark, which is the market basket measure, and we're looking at that as the same. The good news is that the market basket measure for a single individual for PEI is about $19,500, so it aligns
With
very
that.
much so. I guess my question is also, is that 20,000 per adult individual? Did you look at a number for a household, or are you just thinking of it as on an individual
Per
basis?
adult individual.
Per adult individual.
Yes.
Okay.
Annabelle?
Thank you, Chair. I think the other thing I'd taken from your paper was that your recommendation was that it not be based on income. That you are talking about universal, so there's no conditionality in this in terms of income.
Right. Yes, that was the recommendation that had been settled on. And then measures within the tax system to sort out the equity
Right.
of it.
Okay.
Hannah,
So my
did you have
final,
one
I guess
more?
my final,
Yes.
just to clarify on that one, we've talked again of like what are the principles and the conditions. And when I mentioned conditionality, that's one of the things that we've run up against a lot, which is certainly from other presenters, the ongoing barrier of putting conditions immediately takes it away from being universal.
That's right.
But I take your point that if somebody has other income as well, they may not actually, the net effect may be that money's going back into the system in
Right.
another way. So
Correct,
the effect is still
Yeah.
fiscally
Yeah,
manageable
yes.
because those that need it most will retain the most of the money.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that.
Through inevitable changes to the tax system.
Yeah. No, that's it, Chair. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, and that's part of what we have been sort of working through is the idea of, whether a benefit would be universal or income tested, right?
Right.
So it's interesting to hear such a clear recommendation around a universal benefit that would see everyone getting a benefit regardless of income, and then higher earners would pay that benefit back. Rather than it being tested on income first and then benefits paid out that way based on income level. So those are two main differences that we are grappling with. So I appreciate your clarity on that. Sunny Gallant.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. So this $20,000 is based on PEI?
The position paper was on a national or federal level. So it was meant to be like a national-based position paper. So it could be
Okay.
any province or jurisdiction, not specifically PEI.
So it was national.
Yes, it was
Okay.
national in scope.
Sunny?
There was a report out this week, I don't know if you saw it, from Statistics Canada. Said there was approximately 3.2 million people in Canada living in poverty.
Yes,
But it never did say what the poverty line is.
right.
So that's why I'm so going here. And when you look at our rates right now for social assistance for 2 adults and 2 children, it's approximately $40,000 a year. So if you're saying $20,000 per adult and they have 2 children, they're getting $40,000 a year, based on what you're recommending.
Do you have the numbers to quantify that, say?
Yeah, we were giving them here, I was giving them one day, yeah, with the new rates and the child tax benefit and the dental and the things that are provided for people on assistance. It works out to about, yeah, it's 19, and then with the tax, the child tax credit, it comes up to almost 30,000. Well, it's close to $40,000, I believe.
So I think that perhaps that's something we can seek further clarity on then, because I don't.
Maybe the minister can add to that if he wants to have an intervention.
Did you have anything?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, with the adjustments, the additions that were made this past year, the end of December, I think what Mr. Glant does, what Sonny is referring to, it takes into account not only social assistance, but various other, for example, child tax benefits, things along that line that would take it up to that level. Certainly I can get the breakdown, the complete breakdown, and bring it back to the committee. I think it is important information for us to have it exactly what the levels of support are, as well as what all is included in that basket of supports.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, so, sorry, Hannah, did you have something else to add on this topic?
Yeah, I would really dispute that number being correct. I would really appreciate some actual numbers being tabled on that one, because the basic social assistance support for a couple with 2 children is in total is around $20,000. There are obviously additional things like federal child benefits add $10,000 to that, but the total income, including social assistance benefits, federal child benefits, GST credit, provincial tax credit, is closer to $30,000 than $40,000. I want to be really clear that people on social assistance are not sitting on a $40,000 a year income, and I think that would be that is the measure that they should be. But we have had very clear discussions that nobody on social assistance rate is at the measure of poverty set at market basket measure. Even those that are closest to it are still under it, and that includes the couple with 2 children. And you know, they are the closest, but they are not at that level.
So I would suggest that at this point we're a little uncertain as to what those numbers are. So I appreciate the minister bringing those back so that we can have a closer look at that. So thank you, Sunny, for bringing that to our attention. Sunny, do you have a
Thank you, Chair, and I serve to be corrected, and if there was an error there, it'll be good to get the figures. One more question, if I could. So this $20,000 per individual does not include the child tax credit. This is just $20,000. So
The universal basic exemption or basic amount to the person, separate from any other
benefits.
yes.
Thank you.
Did you have any further questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
All right, Gordon McNeely.
Thanks for coming in, and it's great to, excuse me, hear from you. And I know you do a lot of frontline work, and it's important. Recently, member for Charlottetown, Belvedere, and myself went to a basic income guarantee session that was primarily talking with seniors about basic income guarantee. Do you have any thoughts? Because I know OAS and CPP kick in, and there was a lot of questions around that area over 65. And I just want to get your thoughts on what you see in your shop, and if you have any thoughts on a basic income guarantee moving over top of the 65-year threshold.
Right. I would see it as a basic universal amount to everyone, separate from OAS or CPP and other federal or provincial programs like that, whether it be provincial accessibility supports or child tax benefit, any other It would only be intended to replace what would now be the financial assistance, provincial financial assistance program, with any other government benefits remaining in place for families, children, or seniors.
And I think my understanding of how a universal program would work is that everybody would get that $20,000, and then additional income on top of that would be taken into consideration at tax time, and you would pay back a certain amount. So if you know, that would be included in additional income in that calculation, would be sort of the idea, right? Yes.
If I could respond as well, I don't want us to lose sight of one of the what we're expanding in some of the advantages of this model is, I mean, we're all doing this now. We're looking at how different programs interact. The idea of a single universal program has the potential for significant savings, for a considerably simplified kind of process for individuals, and I think, you know, I think we're seeing evidence of that this morning, that we're putting together different numbers to good effect, but the idea of having a single program has the potential for savings, for simplicity, and for a more respectful system.
Thank you. Gord?
No, and that's great, and that's what we're trying. We're trying. This is what's good about it, is having you in to talk about this. Has your organization talked with any federal correspondents about partnerships or those type of, because it's a significant cost, and I think it's good. Everybody's under the impression that this is a good program, and it comes down, you said it's not a lack of character, it's a lack of cash.
That's right.
So Prince Edward Island being a jurisdiction within the federal system, could you let us know about any discussions you've had federally?
Our executive director, based in Ottawa, he's part of various number of coalitions regarding anti-poverty. So I'm not aware right at this time of any specific conversations he's had with like federal ministers or things like that. There's constant lobbying going on by our executive director of the Canadian Association in Ottawa with other anti-poverty organizations on a federal level, and then it comes down to us to advocate here on the provincial level.
Yeah.
Gord, did you have another question?
Yeah. We're trying to put together a pilot, and that's our program, and we're looking at specifically about getting a pilot coming out of this group. And just wondering, I understand that you're suggesting it be universal or and those type of things. Is there anything that you would like to advise this committee on about coming to that pilot versus, you know, location, demographics, or how would you like to input in any specific terms about getting us to include in our recommendations?
Well, I think it just needs to be an amount that allows people to have livable means, to meet their basic needs. Universal has been determined from CISW's research to be the best approach over, say, a negative income tax model or a top-up model. And I think that there's many islanders who are hurting and disadvantaged and just need this to move forward and contribute. And I think that, as the project in Dauphin showed, that, and the report from the cost of poverty report by the Association of Food Banks, that there can be other forms of government saving through this.
Yeah.
And I'm not an economist, I'm a social worker,
yeah.
So, but I think it's a win-win for everyone, for citizens, and I think for government coffers.
Great.
Gord, did you have one more question?
No, that's it.
Okay, perfect. Ernie Hudson.
Thank you, Chair, and as sort of my standard opening, I do want to recognize Roxanne Carter-Thompson in the gallery again this morning. Certainly been keeping abreast of the work of the committee, and it's always great to see you here, so thank you. With regard to, and going back to $20,000 per person that you would recommend it or suggest it, do you see that, what age would you see that starting at and potentially ending at? Because we have had suggestions of starting at 18, 21, 25, so just wondering your opinion on that.
I believe it would be every adult, so at the age of 18.
Okay, so every adult at the age of majority of
Yes.
18?
Yes.
Okay.
Amy Hudson?
Thank you, Chair. What about impact as far as family size? So we're saying every adult, but a family that has one child as opposed to a family that may have 3 or 4 children. Should those factors be taken, or those numbers taken into account?
To be honest, that's not something that I gave thought to in that, but certainly accommodation would need to be made for the number of children, and I think that comes through the child tax benefit, the federal child tax benefit system.
Okay.
Our recommendation, $20,000 per adult.
Amy Hudson?
Thank you, Chair. What about at the other end of spectrum? Certainly we have OAS, we have GIS. Would you see the $20,000 that you were suggesting also being made available or being paid out to seniors?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have one more question there?
Yes, I do. Just wondering, Bruce, if you could elaborate on number 3, the level of income that one must have to access other supports in the community. Just wondering if you could elaborate a bit on that, please.
I think, you know, we all like to think this isn't the case, but to really be present in the community, to be, you know, able to get to the rink, to able to get to the library, implies a certain level of income, and I'm not going to obviously sort of pretend to be an expert on where that is, but you know, you know, one of our goals here, if we're looking at poverty, has to be to get people fully engaged in community. Community is an amazing thing because community provides the networking, our more traditional ways of supporting others that I think we're still good at here. But without adequate resources and an assurance of where people are going to stand in terms of resources, it's difficult for many families to I would argue to fully engage in their communities, to be present in their communities, because of uncertainty around income or their present level of support or income or EI or whatever, not being at a level that enables them to do that. And obviously we don't have that stratified out to make that case, but I think that reality is really present around us. And you know, the stability inherent in a program like this would simply enable people, families, to plan, to engage with regularity and stability. And I think that's where some of our greatest strength lies. It's when we're in contact with our neighbors, with the rest of our community. That's when other organizations in the community, whether they're faith-based or service clubs, are able to do more when people are present. And I guess that's my hope.
Thank you.
Annabelle?
Thank you. One of the other things that we're talking about in this committee, which I think you've touched on briefly here, is that at the same time as doing something as a basic income guarantee, we also need to look at the wage that's paid to workers. And I know you had previously, I think it was CUPE that made the recommendation, or somewhere in here, the recommendation around the $15 minimum wage. We have been tasked to look in the committee here about what a living wage actually is in PEI. We know we've already made some moves to ensuring that measures of poverty are included when the Employment Standards Board meets to review minimum wage as it is now. But I think it'd be really good to talk about sort of a minimum wage and a living wage and how that is the other part of the story of how we help to address poverty and inequity. So perhaps one or both of you could speak to to that as part of this work as well?
Certainly, ma'am, I'm not going to, hang a shingle out that as Kelly alluded, that I'm an economist either, or that I can claim to be an expert on that. What I would say to you, what I would challenge you with, is that I think varying approaches to both minimum wage and what a minimum living wage are all around us. In Canada, certainly with our neighbors to the south, we can see some of the impacts of a very limited philosophical allowance, that it isn't just about coming in at a good level, balancing business needs, although that is important. That in jurisdictions where I would suggest where a minimum wage is where a living wage is considered in coming up with a minimum wage, or those factors are taken seriously by government, that we are seeing the impacts of that. And I can't give you a list of that, but I think that evidence is around us, and I would encourage you to explore that further if I could be so bold, I guess.
Annabelle?
Thank you, Chair. It was the first time I've been called ma'am in a committee meeting, so
I apologize.
kind of excited about that.
Only when I'm nervous.
And I appreciate your comments, because it is the increasing minimum wage. I mean, and to be clear, Chair, for the record, and this is one of the tasks that we do have in this committee, that we've kind of had to sort of go around a bit because we've been working on other things, but a living wage is significantly different than a minimum wage, and generally we don't know what the living wage is for PEI, which is why it's on our agenda. But as an example, the living wage, hourly living wage in Nova Scotia, depending on where you live in Nova Scotia, is anywhere between $18 and $19 an hour. So there's a very big gap from where we are right now with the minimum wage of going to get this wrong, $12.85, am I right? Saying that, we also have, as you mentioned, quite a lot of data out there which is sort of flying in the face of traditional economics, that says, when you increase the minimum wage, it's not the end of the world as we know it, and actually what happens is more people work, there's more money in the economy, and economies grow accordingly. But I think the other aspect, what you said earlier, comes back to is also a large chunk of being brave in there. So the work that we're doing here is to be clear about what a living wage would be, put a number on that, so that we can then inform policy on how we begin to bridge to that space. I guess my point on that one is, or for comment, is actions to address poverty. The basic income guarantee is huge, but it's not the only thing we should be doing.
Correct.
And I think I heard you speak to that about, there's a lot in there around dignity.
That's right.
Yeah, and paying people appropriately for the work that they do when they work.
Yeah.
It brings dignity.
That's correct, and that's as social workers, that's what we're all about, is people need the resources to live with dignity and a sense of pride and accomplishment and fully engage in society. Like Bruce said, where human beings are wired for connection. We want to be connected, and living in poverty and anything under that $18 to $20 an hour doesn't allow you to fully engage and connect and contribute to the world around you.
Ernie Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering if you feel, or where you would see an impact of a basic income guarantee, and if that was at $20,000 per adult, what impact would it have on other services that are presently provided by our provincial government, in some cases certainly in conjunction with NGOs, and just for example, whether it could be child protection services, things along that line.
Right. I would think you would see a significant impact in the health system. People would have means and a sense of pride to take better care of themselves and be more attuned and educated regarding basic health practices, where you would see therefore a reduction in the health system or in health spending, and as well as mental health services, because that's an important part of health. People feeling stronger, having and Having that sense of pride, again, and dignity and worth goes a long way towards mental health and reducing anxiety and depression, because you're not stressed all the time about meeting basic needs. And potentially addiction services. And again, for the same reasons as mental health, addiction and mental health issues are very closely correlated. So I think there would be gains made in those services. Child protection services as well, and reducing poverty and families living with less stress, better able to provide and for their family financially, but also in terms of more enriching quality family and childhood experiences. And just the contribution that people's talents and skills, when they have the means and the support to contribute, the innovation that can take part when people have the resources. If that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your answer on that. Just as a follow-up on it as well, like you look at different professions, and whether it's in the healthcare field, but certainly with regard to social workers, that we do have a challenge in recruiting, retention of social workers within the various departments here in the province. So I guess it's a twofold question. First of all, would you see a basic income guarantee having potentially any impact on the recruitment of social workers? And secondly, would the number of social workers, in your opinion, with a basic income guarantee, the number of social workers required be affected at all?
If I could take that. Our hope would be that, as you know, the research is so clear and consistent that poverty as a what's the phrase, a social determinant of health is just so pervasive into all areas of health that would enable us to get further as a society. Is that an easier pitch to make to new grads that look at the things that are going on in PEI, look where we've come from here to here? Yes, absolutely. You know, we've attracted people recently to the larger system because of some of the innovative things we're doing, some of the new things that we're doing. So while, you know, it's hard to attach numbers to that, I think there'd be some hope that we would help us attract, you know, people either to return home or who have never considered PEI before to work in a system that was making progress on that. Your second question is harder. You know, I think inherent in this is the possibility that some of our work across the public and nonprofit and even private sectors could start to switch into more preventative work, into work that would, it's kind of like compounded interest. It's work that, because we've moved from here to here, then the opportunities to do some prevention with staff, we'll just say with existing levels of staff, to move us to there, you know, everything is cumulative in that way. And there's great optimism for that.
Oh, did you have one more?
Just one more,
yes,
thank you, Chair. Getting back again to the 20,000 per person, and you look at the present minimum wage in the province, an individual who is working, say, 35 hours per week, at 20,000, that individual at minimum wage is not going to be taking home much more than that 20,000. And we've heard, and the question has been put forward before, do you see a basic income guarantee, and if it was at 20,000 or in that vicinity, being any type of a detriment to employment or one searching employment?
No, and the report does speak to that, no, and it could actually create more motivation, because the $20,000 would be your basic personal amount or exemption, increased from what it is now. So then people would be motivated to work more, that it's not deemed to be kind of an impediment to motivation or to work.
And my understanding is that in the Dauphin, Manitoba research, and in other jurisdictions worldwide, that hasn't proven to be the case. That motivation hasn't, and I get the concern, I get the fear that we would all have that might happen, but that hasn't been the case. And I would argue too, if you look at other Canadian examples, in the 1990s, when the Ontario government looked at what was unfortunately referred to as workfare, or how to engage people receiving public assistance in the workforce, that I think a lot of those stereotypes, happily didn't meet up to that. That a lot of the problems, a lot of the systemic kind of issues related to the uncertainty of poverty were relating to some of the reasons that people weren't able to go into the workforce regularly, even with a requirement that they do so. And that's part of our pitch, that a guaranteed annual income has potential to alleviate some of those barriers in ways that few other programs appear able to do.
Thank you. Gord McNeely.
Oh, this is great. I appreciate your answers. There's a lot of questions that I have. Just recently, Stats Canada just came out and said poverty is going down across our country, and tax filings for Prince Edward Island, we see that our average rates, the money that Islanders are making went from 54.7 to 54.7 to 57.1 just recently. And I guess my kind of question is that, and then we look at since then, is that there's been a $6 million addition to social assistance rates recently. Do you guys look at that, and how do you measure the impact of that as an association? Like an influx of like a $6 million into the system, which will bring us closer to to doing better.
Well, I think it comes down to, who benefits most from that, and is it enough to meet those basic needs? And okay, poverty might have gone down, but did some of the higher earners make more? And is that money getting to where it really needs to be, and isn't focused where it really needs to be? And CISW in and of itself doesn't measure that, but there's other anti-poverty organizations out there that would do that. But I think there's more measuring a person's well-being, which is what social work is about. Isn't about GDP. It's about their sense of physical and mental wellness and how they can contribute. So it's a matter of where is that money going.
Yeah, exactly.
Would be my response.
Yeah, and I would add that I think where we're living now is at an unprecedented level of income inequality. And I'm grateful that salaries are going up and the economy is doing as well as it is here. But I think we're looking at a reality now where we can't count on. And I know this has been a debate for 30 or 40 years, and it'll be debated for years from now, but where we can't count simply on those kind of improvements bringing us all up.
Yeah.
It'd be great if it did. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah.
But we can't count on that. And if you look at recent, and obviously I don't have them here, but if you look at recent patterns here and elsewhere around economic inequality, I don't think it's exactly tied. I think there's a lag very clearly that lower income Islanders aren't necessarily proportionately raised by very good stuff like that going on, unfortunately, because it'd be simpler if it was.
And I think that also ties into that low-income workers, precarious workers, are also facing different levels of poverty and experiences with economic hardship, and that they wouldn't be directly impacted by that as well. So just to remember that is something to take into consideration.
Yeah, and we talked about minimum wage today, and it's I guess we're trying to find a balance between the businesses that are employing employing people. And if you look at raising minimum wage, what happens to the businesses? Do they start laying off people? And we're looking for workers in Prince Edward Island. So we're just trying to get at a balance. What about something like taking people on the system, and if they work a minimum wage job and if they qualified, they would get a significant top up into their. I'm just trying to think in a motivational kind of notion about that. So just that's some of the things that I get. So
there's a tradition of that here, and I'm not an expert on income support on the island, but depending on how far you want to go back to the JCP programs, and I think I think they're in individual cases that may be very helpful for people, and that's a wonderful thing if a caseworker can make that connection and make a good match. We would argue that a universal program that offers stability. We've talked about instability and how difficult that can be. I know for members of my own family. That stability just raises it for everybody, and alleviates a lot of those things.
Yeah, that's great to have you here to answer those questions. Thanks very much, Chair.
Yes, Hannibal.
Oh, sorry.
If I could just add
sorry.
to that, sorry. And some of the most vulnerable people who are living in poverty are ones who, for one reason or another, don't have either the physical capacity or the mental health capacity to fully engage in employment. So they're left very vulnerable by any requirement that this be tied with some level in the workforce without some type of support.
Yes, and naturally speaking, absolutely.
Thank you. Hannibal. Thank you.
Chair, for just again, for focus, I think. We need to be careful that when we're talking about poverty and PEI that we recognize we're not only talking about social assistance. Social assistance and PEI, the numbers have really changed very little over the years because it reflects people who are long-term out of the workforce or unable to work, including people with disabilities and households headed by people with disabilities. It represents 3.5% of the population of the province, about 5,500 people, and that number really hasn't moved and changed a lot in 20 years, regardless of what we do to the systems and programs. But the current Stats Canada report that just came out shows that in terms of islanders living in poverty or at or near the poverty line is 18%, right? And we have heard consistently, we've talked about 1 in 5 islanders are food insecure. So whether the number is 14% or 16% or 18%, that's significantly different than the number of people on social assistance. It's almost 1 in 5. And that's what we're talking about here, about the impact of better wages, recognition of the measure of poverty, and talking about programs that are not just about that narrower group who are on welfare, but all those other people who are not able to change their circumstance and are continually struggling. And there's a very big gap between 3.5% and 18%. You're talking about thousands of people in PEI who every day do not have enough to eat. And so I would like to just sort of, Chair, really kind of reinforce that message again, that we are talking about regular everyday people who are going to work and who are struggling. And this is about changing circumstances on a generational basis, and this is the piece about being brave.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
Totally agree.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak.
Ernie Hudson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of final questions from me. First of all, if a basic income guarantee was put in place right across the board in the province of PEI, what would you suggest as the length of time that an individual would have to be a resident of the province before they started, or before they became eligible? And I guess, and we have had that question put forward before, but if the province of PEI has a big in place, is there the potential, which I believe that there is, but is there the potential for movement, immigration to PEI, even from other provinces, because of the fact that we do have it and other provinces don't? So I guess with that, back to my question of how long should an individual, or would you see an individual being a resident of the province before they actually became eligible for BIG?
Wow, yeah, that's a tough question. I know moving between provinces, healthcare, is in 90 days, I believe.
That's all I was going to say, was that
Yeah.
that it be consistent with other rules that are in place for Medicare eligibility or income support, that we have set that as a standard. And it doesn't mean people are without cover. You know, if you look at the medical side of that, it doesn't mean that people were without coverage. They continue to be covered by their previous problem. But I think we've put that standard in place for a reason. And it's, you know, I wish we had a crystal ball, but
Yeah.
you know, I think there's been a lot of thought and go into developing that standard, and perhaps it would be more difficult to have two different standards of eligibility. I mean, there isn't a concept of provincial citizenship. It's just residency. So I would argue it would be difficult to have two different standards of if you're a resident this long, you're entitled to these programs, but you have to be a resident this long to be eligible for guaranteed annual income. I see that as a challenge.
And now I do recognize that we have another presentation after this one, so perhaps, do we have one more question?
No,
Mr.
that's fine.
Dixon? No?
Thank you.
All right, so if there are no further questions, I just want to thank Kelly McWilliams and Bruce Davison for your presentation today and for answering all of our questions. It was incredibly helpful. We will now take a brief recess while we switch over to our next presenters.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. so just hold on. So we are now back from our break, and we have our next presenters. So from the Canadian Union of Public Employees, we have Addie, is it Addie? Is that the right? Addie Rayo, Human Rights Representative, and Leonard Gallant, President of QPPEI. So will be the same format. You'll give a presentation, and then we will ask some questions. So thank you very much for being here. We'll hand over the floor to you.
Okay. Thanks, Trish. I'm sure everybody here knows that Trish was a QP member, local 1870, and also a QP member 3913, is that correct?
I was when I was doing my graduate work.
That's okay, right. Yes, perfect. Good morning to everybody. My name is Leonard Gallant, and I am the president of QPPEI. The Canadian Union of Public Employees is Canada's largest union with over 700,000 members across the country. On Prince Edward Island, QP represents 3,000 workers in education, healthcare, elder care, municipalities, emergency services, post-secondary education, and several other public sector workplaces. Our members work on the front lines of providing services to those living in poverty here on PEI and indeed across the country. Let me first begin by offering my sincere gratitude to the past, present, and future custodians of the land, the Mi'kmaq peoples. We acknowledge that we are meeting today on their ancestral homelands, and I am grateful to have the privilege to do so. Let me also take this opportunity to thank you, the members of this committee, for allowing us to bring the perspective of QPPEI to this conversation about poverty on the island. We are pleased that you are embarking upon this study. There will be those who say that a living wage is expensive, that a basic income is unaffordable. To them we say, it is poverty that is expensive. Poverty costs our province tens of millions in social assistance, in health care costs, and economic costs associated with worse educational outcomes. Poverty costs lives. I will first offer QP's PEI position on basic income guarantee, then on the living wage, and finally I will hand it over to my colleague, Addie Rayo, to address the definition of poverty. Basic income guarantee. I would like to note right at the outset that QPPEI is fully supportive of a basic income guarantee on PEI. We would like to lend our support to the position advanced by Dr. Evelyn Bourget, Canada's leading expert on the topic, as well as by Anne Whitley and Jane Ledwell of the PEI PEI Working Group for Livable Income, an organization we are proud to be a supportive of. That the time for experiments is over. We respectfully urge this committee to recommend the creation of a permanent program, not a pilot. There are three reasons for this. First, we agree with Dr. Forget and others that there is ample evidence already from experiments around the world that support a basic income guarantee. Second, a pilot would require a plan to transition people off the program after the term of the pilot, and this cannot be done without causing some harm to those who begin receiving basic income. Third, in Manitoba and Ontario, as you already know, the basic income pilots fell victim at different stages to political interference. In our view, the best way to insulate the program from a change in government or political opinion is to make it a permanent from the beginning and secure public support. We understand that you have heard from many advocates who have suggested using third parties to administer the program and to gather, analyze evidence as a way to make the program independent of political interference. QPPEI is not opposed to that approach. We do, however, oppose the contracting out of public work where the work can be done by public employees. It is our position that any such delivery and analysis should be done by public employees, either in a government or at universities. QPPEI would also like to draw your attention to the Basic Income Canada Network's recent report that provides 3 costed options for a federally run basic income guarantee. The options presented all eliminate or nearly eliminate poverty and are fully funded by reallocating existing resources and introducing measures for tax fairness. Although the options presented are federally oriented, there are certainly lessons from the analysis that are applicable to provincial program designs. QPPEI would also like to underline the fact that poverty is not just a question of money and cannot simply be addressed by writing checks. We need to ensure that any basic income guarantee does not come at the cost of existing social programs. While a basic income is intended to replace cash transfers, it cannot replace public schools, childcare, special education, hot lunches in schools, or supplementary benefits for people living with disabilities. Living wage. As you know, PEI supports increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. The scheduled increase to minimum wage on PEI in April of 2020 to $12.85 is too low in our view. We recognize, however, that even a $15 minimum wage may not reflect the living wage on the island. Ensuring that islanders make a living wage will put people on the path, not just out of poverty, but towards prosperity as they are able to live a life with dignity. To that end, we would like to draw your attention to the Living Wage Framework. The framework is a project by Canadian experts that has conducted multiple analyses of what constitutes a living wage across the country. Although they have not completed an analysis for Prince Edward Island, we know that the living wage in St. John is just over $16 and in Antigonish is just over $17. Marcia Carroll from the PEI Council of People with Disabilities, who appeared before you in November, called for a living wage on the island of up to $20 an hour. Although we do not have a number to offer you, we can tell you that the Canadian Living Wage Framework includes a definition of living wage, a methodology to calculate it, and even resources for employers who want to be living wage certified. We encourage this committee to recommend the adoption of the framework to guide the development of policy around a living wage. With that, I thank you for your time and welcome any questions you may have after my colleague's presentation. So I'll hand it over to Addie.
Thanks, Len. With your permission, Chair.
Yes, of course.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Aditya Rao. I serve as the Human Rights Representative for QP in New Brunswick and on Prince Edward Island. Leonard has spoken about QP PEI's position on the Basic Income Guarantee and on the living wage. My comments will be limited to your third objective, the framework for the definition of poverty. So please allow me to first thank you for this opportunity to come before you today, and particular thanks, of course, to Emily for all the work she's done coordinating everything and making this possible. Poverty, being a social determinant of health, is without question one of the greatest human rights challenges we face today. Although eradicating poverty ostensibly remains a priority for governments across the country, our approach to poverty eradication often creates more problems than it does generate solutions. This is a perspective I know you have no doubt heard already many times over the past several months. Poverty reduction policies are frequently poverty production policies. Social assistance programs, for example, often require recipients to remain in poverty in order to receive social assistance. Recipients are often expected to liquidate what little they may have in order to be brought up by social assistance from destitution into poverty. If they work too much, they are penalized, creating a disincentive against finding work, forcing them into poverty. If they don't work, they are penalized. They remain in poverty thanks to how low the levels of social assistance are. On that note, PEI ought to be commended for recent changes to social assistance that have increased the amounts recipients can earn before clawbacks, and for increasing the levels of social assistance as well. But this is why we need to rethink how we address poverty and indeed how we define it. With respect to the question of a measure for poverty, QP-PEI recognizes that most experts, including those from the PEI Working Group for a Livable Income, believe that the market-based measure provides the most accurate baseline from which to assess what amount of money is needed to live in a particular community with dignity. We also recognize, though, that defining poverty in relation to an insufficient income to purchase a minimum basket of goods and services does not address the issue fully. It is important for any anti-poverty policy, including a basic income guarantee, to be based on a definition of poverty grounded in a human rights framework. As the anti-poverty organization, Canada Without Poverty, notes, a more modern definition in line with international human rights law is one which addresses the right to live in dignity. As such, the definition of poverty that QP recommends be adopted is one that is proposed by the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. poverty is, and I quote, "a human condition characterized by sustained or chronic deprivation of the resources, capabilities, choices, security, and power necessary for the enjoyment of an adequate standard of living and other civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights." End quote. But why a human rights framework? Well, since people living in poverty are more likely to face violence, be homeless, and face health problems, there is a direct connection between poverty and the right to life. Since people living in poverty are more likely to be criminalized, there is a direct connection between poverty and the right to liberty. Indeed, a human rights framework means that anti-poverty policies must operate in relation to the realization of all other human rights, in keeping with the principle of indivisibility of human rights. This means ensuring that anti-poverty policies advance the right to food, the right to housing, and so on. In other words, we want to respectfully caution this committee from viewing a basic income or any cash transfer alone as an antidote to poverty. There will need to be protections, for example, against landlords who will see an increased cash injection in people's pockets as an opportunity to increase rents when they can. There will need to be protections against evictions. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Housing, Leilani Farha, recently clarified that states which allow evictions into homelessness are in violation of international law. Addressing poverty means addressing affordable housing by building publicly funded not-for-profit housing, by providing funding for cooperative housing. We know that the vacancy rate in Charlottetown, for example, is less than 1%. Giving people who are homeless or struggling with finding housing more money will not automatically result in a roof over their head without also a concurrent housing strategy. Addressing poverty means ensuring access to universal publicly funded and publicly delivered childcare. Addressing poverty means promoting unionization among workers by making it easier to join a union, particularly in a gig economy. Labor rights are human rights, and a rights-based approach to poverty ought to recognize that unionization brings better wages, stability, benefits, and pensions, which are a roadmap out of poverty for the working poor and for those who are working in precarity. Addressing poverty also means taking an intersectional approach to social policy. Indigenous communities are disproportionately affected by poverty as a direct result of colonialism and intergenerational trauma, as you have heard already from community leaders like Chief Darlene Bernard. Women of color, for example, are more likely to live in poverty than white women in Canada. So as PEI looks to attract newcomers to help grow the island's economy, it is important that there be adequate supports in place so that new islanders, who are predisposed to vulnerability by virtue of being new, do not fall through cracks. To conclude, this is all to say that simply providing money will not eliminate poverty. It is critical that the government address access to public services such as affordable housing, education, and healthcare. Having to pay hundreds of dollars, for example, for a dental care procedure or for mental health care could knock someone from above the poverty line to below it. So to wrap up, on the question of a measure for poverty, QPPEI defers to experts who agree that the market-based measure is the right measure by which to determine what a livable income and a living wage ought to be. On the question of a basic income and a living wage, QPPEI supports the institution of a basic income guarantee and respectfully urges this committee to make it a permanent program rather than a pilot. QPPEI also supports the introduction of a living wage and urges the committee to adopt the Canadian Living Wage Framework for guidance. Finally, we also urge you respectfully to use a human rights framework in defining and addressing poverty, recognizing that any solution to ending poverty will need to be multifaceted. A universal basic income cannot alone solve poverty. Poverty needs to be defined not just by a dollar figure, but by reference to the right of all human beings to live in dignity. With that, we're happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We will open the floor to questions. Gord McNeely?
Thanks a lot, Mr. Rao. Just had a quick question. I know that you said at the beginning, that's a great, and was listening quite intently, you represent New Brunswick and PEI. Could you tell us a little bit about what's happening in New Brunswick along this file? And yeah.
I know that you already heard from your own department, I think, last meeting or perhaps the meeting before last, and they had some reference points as well to offer to you from the 4 provinces out here. And I know that PEI is by far offering the highest amounts in Canada, second only to Newfoundland, in terms of providing support. But New Brunswick, unfortunately, is providing currently the lowest amount in terms of social assistance to folks living in poverty, and there's a lot of work to be done in New Brunswick, but I didn't come prepared today to speak to you specifically in terms of what's happening in New Brunswick, so I won't be able to address your questions in detail with respect to what's going on down there.
No, exactly. Another thing that you mentioned is housing, and I think that's a really good point. I think it's time that there's some things coming out in Prince Edward Island. We do have the minister who's responsible for social development and housing here today. So, and it's exciting. These are important dialogues. In your mind, over the next 2 or 3 years, how important is the housing file in terms of what we do in terms of poverty?
Certainly, from our perspective, housing is a critical part of the process that needs to be undertaken in order to address poverty. Without a roof over someone's head, there's not a whole lot that can be done in terms of being able to move forward. This is Black History Month, and there's a famous quote by Martin Luther King Jr., asking a bootless man to pull himself up by his bootstraps is a cruel joke. And without a roof over one's head, to ask somebody to move forward with their lives is not a feasible ask. And so I think a comprehensive housing strategy motivated by a human rights framework, again, looking at housing, understanding that it is in fact a right, something that has already been recognized federally, and I think my understanding is that there's appetite from the federal government to push for investments in housing. But we do it is certainly KP's position that investments in housing ought to be geared towards not-for-profit housing. Investments in housing, in order to make it affordable, ought to be with a view to ensuring that people aren't that we don't rely on the private sector. The private sector has no reason, has no motivation to be generous. The private sector is out there to make a profit. And if our intention as a community is to ensure that people have access to affordable housing, the only way we can do that is by ensuring that there is access to not-for-profit housing, that there is access to cooperative housing.
Gord, did you have another question?
Yeah, one more question. Thanks a lot for mentioning that. Thanks a lot for mentioning Black History Month. It's, and I often see in my role that there is inequality amongst people moving to our country, and they live in poverty, but they're excited to be here. But at times there's nothing that we feel like we can do in terms of the rules around federal immigration and what we can provide service from. So how would you see that as a provincial jurisdiction we can help out people a little bit more if they don't qualify for the BIG or the Universal Basic Income right away? That's kind of a tough question.
Are you referring to sort of residential requirements to
yeah.
accessing?
Yeah, in your opinion.
It is certainly, I think, QP's position that any social programming ought to be compliant with certainly human rights principles. And one of the human rights principles that Canada is bound by is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And one article in that covenant very clearly states that everyone has the right to social security. It doesn't impose a residential requirement. It doesn't impose a citizenship requirement. It very clearly says everyone. The state of international law certainly is clear, even if domestic law hasn't caught up, that everybody has a right to access these programs. So it would not be in keeping with human rights law to go forward with a program that imposes a requirement that is based on residency or citizenship. That is certainly the legal side of it. From a research side of it, I mean, if you want to know, I know over the past few months you've had questions and concerns around, will this cause an influx of people coming into PEI as a result of having a universal basic income? Well, the only way you can find out if it'll be that way is if you don't impose a residency requirement. I mean, you can't study the effects of the program in terms of whether or not people will choose to come to PEI in order to live here as a result of the program, unless you are open to the idea that people can come to PEI in order to benefit from the program and live and work here. And PEI already has a labor shortage. PEI has, in fact, a critical worker program, I think it's called, targeted specifically at attracting newcomers to PEI. So it would very much be in keeping with the objectives already of the province to attract people to come to the island if you didn't have those kinds of conditions associated with such a program relating to residency. I hope that answers.
That's a great answer. I appreciate it. That's a complex question, but you helped me. Thank you.
Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and sort of following on from my colleagues' questions there, absolutely there, I think it is something that we have tackled, that valid concern, the balance of that being, as it is for social assistance, nobody chooses to go into that program because it's going to make them rich. I mean, when you're getting $1,000 a month, you're not exactly living high. So there is some reality check in there about the incentive versus the reality of money. And I really appreciate your points, number of points in there about the holistic approach of this, and this is a part of the toolkit. It is, it's obviously the big part in terms of economic, concept, but it still doesn't sit in isolation from everything else. We obviously, Chair, we have some significant labour challenges here. One of the pieces we also have is a number of temporary foreign workers who don't have any rights at all.
That's right.
And that is of huge concern, people who are resident here have chosen to come here and are working very hard here and don't have access to any services. So we need to look a little close to home right now in terms of what we do before we begin to sort of worry about other impacts that aren't even here yet. Chair, I also appreciate very much the discussion around the need for public housing as part of that housing strategy. It is definitely a gap, and it doesn't matter how much incentivization we do or programming. If just today, there's conversation going on online about that there literally is nowhere to live, so how can people stay? And so there is part of our costing is going to need to reflect that investment requirement in addition to the what feels like the cash investment. You had recommended the framework here for the living wage. Are you aware of any other framework or tools that may be available to assist in some of that kind of more complex planning that we're talking about? Because it seems to be one of the barriers for us here on this committee. We're talking about really big, complex system changes.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Just on the first note you made through the chair, Ms. Bell, that nobody goes to make nobody's excited to only make $1,000 a month, that kind of thing. One of the concerns that often comes up and has been brought up before this committee, I know that is this going to result in an incentive to not work? If this program exists, and I want to preempt that question and concern, by noting that concern is predicated on a prejudice that people living in poverty do not want to work or choose not to work, and the reality is that something like 70% of people living in poverty, perhaps more, are in fact working, and in other words, they're working poor. They're poor despite the fact that they're working, and so. Ensuring that people meet a baseline of an income so that they don't have to worry about being in poverty, they don't have to worry about making ends meet, only empowers people to in fact go forward and succeed and work. And in fact, one of the reasons why the labor movement is supportive of a basic income is because it creates, it increases bargaining power. It allows people an out from terrible working conditions. If you're not forced to be working in really bad conditions, and if you know that if you leave that job you can be secure, then you have bargaining power. You have the ability to fight back. You have the ability to stand up for your rights, and that's part of the reason why the labor movement is supportive of it. Did you want to touch on the temporary foreign workers?
No, you go ahead. You're doing well.
Well, on the question of other tools and frameworks, I know that there is currently at this very moment a big conversation happening in BC around living wage. There's a municipality just outside of Victoria that has become living wage certified, and I don't have the name off the top of my head, but I know that has a population of just sort of half of PEI, and if they can do it and be a living wage certified employer, which of course means that they guarantee everybody working for the municipality and any organization within its jurisdiction only pays a living wage or more, that PEI can also do it. And I would direct the committee respectfully to look at BC and see what's going on in those conversations over there in terms of other frameworks that could possibly help you. In addition to that, and we often, as we talk about local issues, sometimes forget that we're part of a global community. The International Labour Organization has frameworks as well and papers around what are the different issues and what are the different models, including the ILO has a paper that canvasses the basic income across the world with country by country by country analysis, and from Iran to India to Nigeria to Canada. So I encourage you to look at that, and I'm happy to share that with you if you haven't seen it yet.
Great. Thank you. Yes, we would definitely appreciate that. Yes. Hannibal, did you
No,
have a question?
thank you very much. Thanks.
All right. We have questions. I have a question. So, as you mentioned, I was a former CUPE member, and for those who are not as familiar with unions or have never been a part of a union, when you say that this is CUPE's position, I thought you could perhaps elaborate a little bit on how a union such as CUPE comes to that position. So I'm sure there were resolutions that were passed around basic income and support. So if you could tell me a little bit about that process here in PEI and where that support, how that is established.
Yeah, sure. Basically, we have a convention every year, and delegates from across the island attend these conventions, and each local, there's 17 locals across the island, they all can put in resolutions for, any sort of thing that public stuff, any issue they would see, that the union would support. And those resolutions come to the floor, and they're debated amongst the folks at the convention, and these resolutions are debated back and forth, and and when there's a vote that takes place, and the membership decides if we support these resolutions, and those are the resolutions that are basically that we're here today about, is basic income guarantee and social housing and public housing. Those are all types of things. I think actually the minister, I sent you a letter basically a while ago to talk about social housing and affordable homes, like for seniors and low income. So those things all come to basically to our convention and are supported at that level, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Gord, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just was, we talked earlier in your presentation about the contracts to deliver a program would go to public employees or universities. Was that the administration of that's how you see it, as the basic income, if it comes to fruition, they would deliver that, and that would be the best?
If I can clarify that a bit.
Yeah, sure.
That bit from our presentation is motivated by some conversations you've had over the fall around. I had the chance to review some of your transcripts, and I know that it has been recommended to you. Former Senator Hugh Segal also recommended this to the Ontario government, that the program be sort of run by an arm's length, perhaps independent body, nonprofit, that kind of thing. And for program integrity, and I think that was proposed as also a way to get around the concern that a change in political climate could result in the program being killed. Our position is simply that this is a public initiative. It is in the public interest. It is something that should therefore be done in a publicly funded way and a publicly delivered way. And so that just means, in our view, that the program can be designed, implemented, and run by government to the extent that you need to have independent researchers and so on. There are publicly funded universities that can do that. So we just caution, our remarks are only meant to be a caution to sort of essentially not go down the road of privatizing public services by starting with this.
Okay, great.
Gord?
And I just wanted to, this committee's role is we're mandated to deliver and to come forward with recommendations to the Ledge about the pilot. And you'd mentioned in there that it's time to look out past the pilot or an experiment. I just wanted to ask you about that because the data seems to be lacking to completion across various basic income guarantees that have been conducted. Is it still your recommendation that we potentially move right away to a program? And I just want you to talk about that for.
Yeah, part of the reason, of course, was there's three reasons that certainly we put forward as to why we suggest that. One, of course, is that it's difficult to roll back from a pilot without causing some harm to the folks who have been receiving basic income to begin with. But really, the big reason is that we believe the evidence is there. This has been tried in various forms across the world. There's enough evidence out there. There have been enough experiments. There have been enough pilots, and it's time to use those lessons and roll out a permanent program. And we know that this works also because we have a version of universal income already. We have OAS, we have GIS, we have these different schemes that are in a way a universal income of sorts, right? And we know that these cash transfers can work, can do good, and we don't need, I think, any more experiments, particularly in terms of a universal basic income. And the biggest reason, I think, why we are proposing this, in addition to the fact that the evidence is settled, is because it is the only way to guarantee that a change in government or a change in political opinion won't result in this program being canceled. I know you heard from the Hamilton Roundtable, I think 2 meetings ago, or perhaps again the last meeting, I can't recall, but they told you stories from folks whose checks were cut, who after a year they were promised 3 years, they were promised 3.5 years, and suddenly they had made big life decisions based on that promise, and then they were faced with unimaginable problems. And so I think our position is what it is because we believe very much that the time for experiments is over. People get hurt, clearly, but the way to avoid it is to simply just go with it with the intention to make it a permanent program. And this wasn't in our remarks, but we've talked about piloting it in parts of PEI and so on, but in a way, doing a permanent program in PEI is a pilot for Canada, right? So we respectfully urge the committee to consider going down that road for those reasons.
Thank you. Gord, one more question.
You talked about those programs are all basically federal government supported initiatives. If this committee cannot get at this time the support of the federal government, what would you suggest we do in coming to our conclusion? How do we proceed alone with this?
We made a submission to PEI in February of 2018, a budget submission where we talked about a path forward to end poverty in this budget submission, and I think certainly there are tools that the PEI provincial government can use to generate revenue, and we all know that You know, we don't currently have a fair tax system. We know that people who are the most wealthy don't pay their fair share. We know that corporations are paying historically low taxes, and these all represent losses in hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every year. So there are ways in which the provincial government can, for sure, model a program on its own that could result in an increase in payments or in a universal basic income. I can't speak to, of course, conversations between you and the federal government, but you know, certainly our understanding is that the federal government has shown some willingness to work on this issue, and it is our hope that that willingness is mutual.
Great answers.
Sydney.
So, Chair, and thank you so much for your presentation. I appreciate your commitment to following on, understanding what has been happened previously in the meetings as well. It's very helpful to the discussion. So thank you for that. Following up on Gord's point, and that's kind of where I was going too, because I know, Leonard, I think you referenced a report or an organization that had talked about tax changes federally, right? You know, with in order to raise the revenue that they would need, is the basic income Canada network, I think is what you're referencing. And they had talked about, of course, you know, like slight increases in small business tax and corporate income tax, and then also, you know, 60,000 plus, you know, personal income tax as well to raise that revenue. And of course, then we think if we can't get the feds on board, what as a province can we do? And provincially, we're reducing small business tax rate and a number of things too. So I guess, has that discussion happened in the QP table too? You know, like, is that something that we're interested in pushing provincially if we can't get the feds on board, or is that more of a policy across the board that we need the federal government on board? Because, and how that would affect the membership, you know, with those slight increases.
No, I think we would be okay with, like, if, you know, hopefully, like we said, the federal government would be on board. I mean, they seem, like you said, they seem to have some commitment to that. But no, I think we would definitely be still in support of a provincially run program. Our members, we're trying to bring people up, right? So that, I mean, that's, if the provincial government has to do that on their own, I think that's quite okay. I mean, I think there is means to do that program on their own if the federal government doesn't come on side. So I don't think it's an issue with us at all.
Sure.
Sydney?
Thank you. And it's a decision that, you know, the provincial government will have to make. Is, you know, is it within the current, you know, tax scheme that, you know, that they can raise that, or is it a decision to raise taxes in a number of ways, kind of thing, to pay for something originally? And as you say, you know, you raise taxes to make an investment to raise people up, that kind of thing too. So I was just curious when you referenced, you know, because I think they were on the radio a while ago too. They had done a CBC interview about that group that, you know, what would need to raise tax-wise. So no, I'm just ran the QP table if that's the discussion that was had or not. But
well, yeah, we've, in a small circle, we've had that. It hasn't been to the general membership for sure, but around the small tables, yes, we're definitely, that's not an issue with us at all. We're definitely in support of having a provincially run program, if that's what it needs to be at the end of the day.
I appreciate both of your time. Thank you.
Could I add something to that, Madam Chair? Mr. McEwen, through the chair, certainly part of the answer to one of your questions about, you know, the conversations we've had around that particular report is that one of the co-authors of that report is Chandra Pasma, who is a researcher for QP. QP has always been intimately involved in these discussions, and proud to have been. And the second part around, you know, changes that you can make provincially, in our budget submissions in 2018 to the government of Prince Edward Island, we suggested that you could add 2 tax brackets, for example, as a very concrete measure. PEI only has 3 tax brackets, and Nova Scotia has 5. I think you stop at 16.7% for people making 63,000 and over, whereas Nova Scotia has 17.5% progressive tax rate for those making between 93,000 and 150, and 21% for those making over 150,000, and that can generate additional revenue as well. According to our submissions to you in 2015, those islanders with individual income levels of 75,000 and over made up 12.5% of the population. So that's a significant number of people in the province who could be contributing to helping uplift those who aren't as fortunate.
Thank you. Sid, did you have any further questions?
No, I appreciate that.
Thank you for that clarification. And this just brings me to a quote as well from that recent report from the Canadian Basic Income Network, and it's right here. Would we rather have tax breaks for wealthy Canadians or dignity and security for low-income Canadians? And that is one of the questions that we have to grapple with, as a committee. So thank you for your comments on that. Are there any further questions? All right. Well, I want to, is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, I have nothing, no.
That's it, unless you have,
Great, thank you so much. Well, I want to thank Adita Rayo and Leonard Gallant for being here today and sharing your experience and knowledge from the QP perspective. So we will take another short recess to reset, and then we will come to the last part of our agenda items.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on in our agenda, we now come to new business, and I will just bring to the committee's attention that after new business on the agenda, we do have discussion of committee's timeframes. So asking if there's any new business that anyone would like to bring forward at this time. Yes, Hannah.
Chair, I'd just like to bring it to the attention of the committee that there is a conference happening in Hamilton, Ontario on May 21st to 24th, which is the North American Basic Income Guarantee Congress. So it's happening at McMaster University. I recognize that this is probably at the end of our spring session, but I would like to sort of bring it to the attention of the committee that this is occurring, whether or not any members can participate. I would also ask if the committee is comfortable with me notifying that Congress of the work that we are doing here, so that if they wish to reach out to us in any way, we can do so to bring to that Congress's attention the work that we're doing here, if they're not already aware.
Okay, opening that up for discussion. All right, Emily, what would be the process, or the is there a sort of a process for committee members to attend something like this, or is that possible?
I'm sure, yeah, if any committee member wanted to attend, I'm not sure if, in relation to the work of the committee, if there would be funds there for that, but certainly any member is free to attend whatever conference they would like on the matter.
Okay, wonderful. Perhaps, Hannah, you can circulate the information about that conference as well, or share it with Emily, and she can circulate. All right, so does the committee, actually I can't make a motion, but it sounds like that was...
Chair, what I would suggest is I will share the information about the Congress. I think it would be important for the committee to be aware it's happening, but perhaps just, again, we can then discuss further based on the information available. But for now, let's get that out. So no motion, perhaps no motion required at this point. We can think about it and discuss again at a future meeting. Okay. Would that be acceptable?
Yeah. Oh, Gord?
I just want to say, is it worthwhile for the committee to reach out and submit a letter to the organizers potentially and tell them what we're doing, and potentially send one of the committee members up to ask for them to sponsor one of our committee members to go up and make a presentation up there potentially?
It is a formal academic, it has an academic component and a public component. There was actually a call for proposals which is closed. However, I know they've had some challenge. The reason it's on my radar, Chair, is because I know they had some challenges with their submissions portal, and I got a notification about it. It looks like, however, that the agenda's already closed for submissions. However, you know, perhaps Chair, we could look at it offline and see if there is any way to kind of just sort of raise the hand, and whether they wish to contact us further would come from that.
All right. Yes, that sounds good. Thank you. All right. Any other new business? All right. So moving on to the next item, discussion of committee's time frame. So at the last meeting, we had agreed that we would like to discuss the time frame in more detail. If we would like to consider the time frame in terms of the upcoming report and next steps, then that would be a discussion we would have in camera. So I don't know if there is a motion to move into camera to have a discussion about. All right, all in favor? Aye. All right, thank you. So we will now move into camera to discuss timeframes. Thank you. And the report. Do I have to do that?